Hey guys, this is Brown Chubby Bear from Political Bear Nation, and today we're going to be talking about some of the infighting and general turbulence in the White House. The latest news is that former Fox News weekend host and current Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is about to be replaced. Now, this was first predicted by Hegseth's former spokesperson, John Ulliott, after Pete fired 3 of his most loyal staffers and the leak of Signalgate Part II. To bring everyone up to speed, in Signalgate Part I, DUIP started a signal chat with various stakeholders, including Vice President J.D. Vance and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, among others, and discussed war plans before the Houthis were bombed. Hegseth said nothing classified was shared and no war plans was discussed. But Jeffrey Goldberg released the text messages later on, which included the date and times of the planes and weapons that were being used. That pretty much says he was sending war plans over text. Now, we have information that Pete didn't just do this once, but at least twice. He had a signal chat that included his wife and his brother, and apparently he shared much of the same information with them as he shared with Tulsi and Vance. This is a clear violation of the law, and it's an obvious threat to national security. The opinion piece I refer to is on Politico, and it's by John Ulliott. Like I said, that's his former Pentagon spokesperson. And he said he did not see a way for Pete to stay as the defense secretary. He called it the month from hell. John said there was escalating chaos, dysfunction, and infighting at the Pentagon, which he argues has been a significant distraction for Trump and the entire administration. He also claimed that Hegseth is under investigation for sharing detailed military operational plans on Signal, not once, but twice. Pete even brought his wife to sensitive meetings with foreign officials and arranged a top-secret Pentagon briefing for Musk, which was later canceled by Donald Trump. NPR said the White House is exploring replacements. Of course, when asked about this, the White House called it fake news, largely because it was based on an anonymous U.S. official. Picking Hegseth was an absolute embarrassment at the time, and now it looks even worse. No Democrats voted for him. J.D. Vance had to cast the deciding vote to confirm him. The vote was that close. In the Senate, 3 Republicans, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitch McConnell, opposed the nomination as well. Frankly, I am sure that Trump's advisors are telling him to get rid of Pete, no matter what Trump or Propaganda Barbie says publicly. And we know this is not the first time the White House has had competing voices trying to get Trump to backtrack on bad decisions. Peter Navarro, one of Trump's most trusted advisors and an advocate of Trump's tariff plan, is someone that has butt heads publicly with Elon Musk, but he has also privately butted heads with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Both Bessent and Lutnick privately wanted Trump's tariff plan to stop setting the markets haywire. The Wall Street Journal reported that Navarro is constantly around the Oval Office, and he was urging Trump to keep the tariffs in place, despite Republicans, Trump's billionaire donors, and most financial experts publicly stating that Trump's tariff plan was destroying the economy apart. The story goes that Navarro was scheduled to meet with economic advisor Kevin Hassett in a different part of the White House, so Bessent and Lutnick both ran to the Oval Office for an unscheduled meeting and pressured Trump to pause some of the tariffs. They asked him not just to pause the tariffs, but to announce the pause immediately to calm the struggling financial markets. They actually stayed with him in the Oval Office until he put out a post on Truth Social. Not many knew of Bessent and Lutnick's plan. Not Navarro, and not U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, who found out Trump paused the tariffs live during his Senate testimony. Here's a clip of that interaction.
Well, as I mentioned...
it looks like your boss just pulled the rug out from under you and paused the tariffs, the taxes on the American people. There's no strategy. You just found out 3 seconds ago, sitting here, we saw you.
We've been discussing a variety of
If you came here knowing that you were going to be turned off, that these tariffs were going to be turned off, why didn't you include that in your opening statement? Why didn't you reference that as part of your testimony?
Well, I don't disclose my conversations with the president, sir.
These were specific questions. We asked you all along, what's the strategy? These are real consequences for the American people and small businesses. I had a group of small businesses in my office earlier today talking about the impacts of these tariffs on aluminum and steel. This is amateur hour, and it needs to stop. What does this even mean for your negotiating strategy? How are you in charge of negotiation if the president is tweeting about this from wherever the hell he is?
Now, the tariff pause calmed the stock market and, most importantly, the bond market temporarily. Now we are seeing the effects of yet more instability in the White House as Trump is blaming Jerome Powell for not lowering interest rates. Obviously, Powell has good reasons for not reducing the interest rate. Trump's instability is causing the markets to dive, and lowering interest rates will not remedy that instability. In fact, lowering rates could worsen inflation and slow economic growth, which could push us into a stagflation. Powell believes that monetary policy decisions should be based on economic data, not on political demands, and he's 100% right. Steve Weiss, the founder and managing partner at Short Hills Capital Partners, is also a frequent commentator on CNBC. I was watching CNBC today, and basically, he said that he reduced his exposure and converted the majority of his stock investments into cash because Trump is simply too volatile. Listen to the clip.
We are aligned with what UBS is saying in terms of looking forward when we have these types of events.
That's the difference. I don't see this as an event. I see this as long-term and events with Brexit, events with financial crisis, events with 2015 when oil went below, cash costs.
So what are you 100% in cash?
I'm almost completely hedged. Yeah.
Because
very, very little exposure.
But to Amy's point, so you don't believe that a social media post literally could cause a reversal in this market.
No, I do.
Faster than you can say I'm hedged.
I do, but I don't believe it will be sustainable because the road is already going towards recession. That's the road I see, and going towards stagflation. You take comments that are so misplaced. Now's the time you want to instill confidence in the Fed. You don't want to call somebody a loser who's running the Fed, who's responsible for economic policy, not just here, but in the world by association. So that does you no good. So I do believe that we'll see, in principle, we agree to trade agreement in principle with Japan, but the details will be murky. It's the same type of headline that I'm going to settle the war. I'm going to settle the war in Ukraine.
So what?
First 24
I guess I'm trying to get to the. I guess I'm trying to get to the point. Does that mean if you see it as a long-term thing, as long as President Trump's the president, you're not going to buy stocks in the U.S. equity market?
Well,
is that what you're saying?
It may ultimately get to a point where I do that.
Honestly, the whole 15-minute segment is worth watching. I'll put a link to it in the description below if you want to watch the whole thing. But Weiss is on the money. Trump is so unpredictable and so unstable that investing in the American stock market has become just as bad as gambling in a casino. If you were planning to retire anytime soon, particularly in the next 3.5 years, you could have some very tough decisions to make. Weiss usually tells people to stay with their positions and go through temporary market fluctuations, but not this time. Steve has had a decades-long career in senior roles at major investment firms, and he's currently a hedge fund manager. And he is publicly stating that he might stay out of the American stock market completely until Trump is no longer president. The White House's instability is not limited to just the financial markets or the hiring of DUI Pete. American diplomats panicked this weekend as a draft executive order that would radically reshape the State Department circulated around Washington. Just like Propaganda Barbie, Marco Rubio has called the New York Times and political stories fake news. The changes would completely eliminate the regional bureau devoted to Africa and shrink the U.S. diplomatic presence in Canada. The alleged proposal would farm out much of the State Department's work on Africa directly back to the White House itself, and all non-essential embassies and consulates in the sub-Saharan African area would then be closed by October 1st of this year. The order would also eliminate the Policy Planning Bureau, which serves as a primary strategic arm of the U.S. Department of State. Its main function is to provide the Secretary of State with independent policy analysis and advice. With this order, the State Department would no longer provide independent information to the White House. The White House would dictate policy to the State Department. And who knows what Trump's policy would even be based on? Maybe something that he saw on Fox and Friends? More and more power has been given to the executive branch over the years, and Trump continues to be more and more authoritarian. And while Trump is busy destroying the American economy, calling the Fed chair a loser, and trying not to look like an idiot by making a weekend Fox News anchor the Secretary of Defense, his mass deportation plan was just halted by the Supreme Court. Video from Friday night shows ICE buses full of Venezuelan migrants headed towards an airport in North Texas, but abruptly turned around as the Supreme Court ruled the Trump administration must stop deporting Venezuelan men based under the Alien Enemies Act. For now, 28 detainees were on the bus and left the ICE facility, with some men on board being told they were being deported to El Salvador and some being told they were headed towards Venezuela. The ACLU is a group that was fighting on behalf of these detainees. On top of that, El Salvador President Bukele proposed sending 252 Venezuelans deported from the U.S. and imprisoned in his country to Venezuela in exchange for taking political prisoners held by Venezuela. Venezuela's chief prosecutor, Tarek William Saab, described El Salvador's Signalgate prison as no longer a torture center, but a place of forced disappearance of innocent Venezuelan nationals. The U.S. has active sanctions against the Maduro regime in Venezuela and does not recognize Venezuela's 2024 election results. A prisoner exchange involving U.S. deported individuals could create a perception that the Trump administration is indirectly negotiating with Maduro, which would be the opposite of the current policy to isolate Maduro's government. The proposal creates yet another rift between Trump and factions within his own Republican Party and could make further appearances in court difficult for the Trump administration to plead their case. Currently, their argument is that these Venezuelan migrants are the worst of the worst, and they are so bad they deserve to live in a prison built for terrorists, but suddenly they qualify to be free in Venezuela? This past week has been very bad for Trump, and with the markets continuing to tank, and with the new scandal involving his Secretary of Defense, I don't think it's going to get any better this week. Adding to that were the massive protests that took place on April 19th, showing Trump and Republicans that while they might still have approval from their Republican base, Democrats and independents are pissed. As I stated in the last episode, 90 million Americans who could have voted chose not to. If you are one of those Americans, please register to vote and get ready to vote in the midterms. There's no way anyone that has a rational brain can look at what's been going on since Trump started his second term and say, this is what they want America to look like. There are more protests being organized for May 1st. Stay informed and subscribe to the Political Bear YouTube channel and the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next time, this is Brown Chubby Bear with Political Bear Nation.
Where the stories collide, political bears on an untamed ride, roaring through truths, the left and the right, setting the stage for a wild insight. Political Bear Nation ready